الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وحده والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعده. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I'm so excited, mashallah, to be here. This is my second time participating in this wonderful conference, and I'm especially excited about after I get done with this presentation and this talk to go and enjoy all of the wonderful baklava and the kebabs that Antef has to offer, mashallah. I have to say, I had to manage my ego and my nafs to ensure that my intention remained pure in me coming here. So my topic is about resilience, psychological resilience, and how do you maintain resilience in the face of adversity, challenges, trials, and tribulations that we're often faced with. Particularly, it's notable that we're in this region, in the southern region of Turkey, where there was a significant earthquake that had taken place. So psychological resilience is a very important sort of topic, and we want to sort of explore the dimensions of it a little bit. So psychological resilience, what is this? You know, when we talk about psychological resilience, it's about this capacity to be able to absorb a shock. So imagine a car. The car has certain shock waves or shocks on them, right? And if you are driving on the roads or bumpy roads, then it has the ability to kind of go up and down and bounce a little bit. And if it didn't have these shocks on it, every time it hit that barrier or it hit a bump, then it would cause a lot of damage and internal damage to the vehicle. And so psychological resilience is about having certain psychological resources and capacities and capabilities that allows you to be able to absorb the shock of the trials and tribulations and the turbulent nature of the world and its associated struggles. But what I do want to highlight about psychological resilience is that it is intimately and intricately tied to something else that's really important. And I want to spend a little bit of time unpackaging that. And that is psychological well-being. Because people who have a lot of psychological resilience are generally individuals who, when they're not tried with trials and tribulations or turbulent times, they usually live a relatively good life, in the sense of they live a life filled with meaning and generally higher levels of satisfaction. And we know that psychologists now are becoming interested in this because they're finding that disorder, the absence of disorder, does not necessarily mean happiness. The opposite of disorder, psychological disorder like depression, anxiety, etc., is actually not happiness. How do we know this? Well, there's one study that I can cite and tell you about, and that's one that was done during COVID at the University of Chicago. And they found that during COVID, 14% of people reported being satisfied and happy with their lives. I'm not talking about how many people were depressed or anything like that. I'm saying 14% of people said they were happy. That's alarmingly low, isn't it? But it's to be anticipated to a certain degree. We could expect it. This was during COVID. Everybody was locked down. They're trapped inside their houses. Lots of anxiety about things. So happiness was very low. But what was very interesting is that they compared it to the numbers pre-COVID. And they found that the United States population that they had surveyed, and when they generalized it, it was only about 31% of people were happy before COVID actually occurred. Now this is what begs the question. Only 31% of people were actually happy and satisfied? That's really alarmingly low. And when we know that psychological well-being and a sense of satisfaction is connected to psychological resilience, we know then that there is a lot of vulnerability then in the population. And we know that the United States is among, and other developed Western countries by extension, are also among the saddest and most anxious societies that the world has ever seen. And so psychologists have started to become interested in how do we generate sort of psychological resilience, but also psychological well-being outside of times when people are tried. Because remember, I said it's like the shock that you absorb when times hit you. And that ability to absorb is based upon how much psychological well-being you have. And psychological well-being, they find that, for example, when you take people who have been given a trauma or trauma-inducing phenomenon, a traumatic event, a tragic event, about 1/3 of those individuals experience what we call PTSD. They get sick, clinically sick. The other third, which is in the middle, they're in the normal range. They're individuals who experience certain levels of distress, but after some time they recover. They can go on with their lives. I'll bet they never forget the incidents, but they can move on. They can be functional. What's very interesting is about the other third. The remaining third of individuals are individuals who now they're calling in the literature PTSG, post-traumatic growth. Okay? And so these are individuals who actually end up leading better and healthier lives than they did before. They actually become better human beings as a result. They not only are able to withstand the suffering, not to say that they don't feel distressed, but they're able to recover and bounce back from the stress in ways that makes them better and more meaningful individuals. And this ties into my notion and idea of psychological well-being. So psychologists have went on to then study these individuals. They've said, let's go ahead and study this 1/3 of these people. What are they doing? What are their characteristics? What is it that gives them the capacity to absorb trauma and come out healthier rather than dysfunctional? Not only normal, but healthier than they were before. And one of the things that they find is they have a lot of psychological well-being and contentment. They have a sense of contentment. And this contentment they call eudaimonic pleasure, eudaimonic contentment, versus hedonic or hedonistic pleasure. And what psychologists are finding is that the healthier an individual is, they have greater levels of eudaimonic contentment or pleasure, and not so much hedonistic or hedonic pleasure. And what's the difference between the two? Well, as the name suggests, hedonic or hedonistic pleasure seems to suggest a lot more with animalistic, material benefits and cravings and aims. Just like I talked to you about the baklavas and the kebabs. That's more of a hedonic pleasure, right? After we get together and we eat, we enjoy that. They're temporary. They're short-lived. They don't necessarily add anything to your life permanently. And in fact, they find that the more hedonistic pleasure you seek, i.e. the more comfort and happiness that you seek, the less resilient you are and the more at risk you are for psychopathology. This is actually really important information that they've sort of started to put together and rethink the way that they deal with society. Because if we look at the neo-Freudians, for example, of the 1950s, Wilhelm Reich, for example, who was a significant figure at the time, who was one of the followers of the Freudian school. And remember, the Freudians believe that the more that they engineered, and they said if we were to create a society in which we can remove judgment from individuals and create an overly permissive society, then people don't have to repress their desires and they won't be sick anymore. Because their original hypothesis was that the reason why we're sick is because of the fact that we repress a lot of our desires. And so he launched this large experiment in the United States. He was rejected, by the way, in Europe. People didn't want to have it in Europe. He went to the United States and they started to actually implement this in the form of policy and revision of societal norms. And this is where we are today. A society where everybody's really sensitive to judgment and you can do and say virtually anything that you want, whether it's on social media or, unless it's the Palestine issue, obviously we know the contradictions in the permissiveness of what we're allowed to do. You're allowed to be tolerant in so much as you question their tolerance, right? So this is itself another problem, right? But they're finding that the more permissive a society gets, the less stable and less adjusted and less happier contentment, eudaimonic pleasure that they achieve. And so now they're saying, you know what, we need to focus on developing contentment. And guess what's connected to contentment? People who feel content are actually individuals who are able to embrace discomfort and lead a life of virtue. So there's a greater focus on character now and character development. And they're saying, look, if you want to solve the problem of adolescent delinquency, drugs, if you want to solve the problem of inattention, marital dysfunction, employment, non-satisfaction, because we find the Z generation tends to be individuals who turn over jobs very quickly. They tend to be highly volatile workers. They're not your ideal worker, in fact. And so they're saying, if we can create and emphasize character and fuse it back into society and the development of virtues, that we can steadily and slowly address this problem of psychological maladjustment or psychological instability. And so at the heart of psychological resilience and psychological well-being is actually the inculcation of character. And where does this, it seems like we went full circle. And if we look back in our own very tradition, O Muslims, we can understand that this was something that our tradition has already told us. من عمل صالحا من ذكر أو أنثى وهو مؤمن فلنحيينه حياة طيبة. That whomsoever does good deeds strives, and that they are a believer, they have an orientation towards ethics and truth and guidance, we will give them the good life. And many of the mufassirin translate or explain that the good life, hayatan tayyiba, is qana'a, a life of contentment. A life of contentment, that individuals will feel satiated and satisfied. And the Prophet ﷺ tells us as well, the opposite, the person who is at risk, for not having well-being, not having contentment. العاجز من أتبع نفسه هواها وتمنى على الله الأمانية. The ajiz, the debilitated, the shackled one, is the one who embraces their hedonistic desires. They make themselves follow all of their permissive desires, and then they hope for good. And it's quite a contradiction. And so some of the qualities that we're finding, even the psychological literature showing us, is that people who have virtues of meaning, they have virtues of gratitude, higher levels of spirituality, reliance on the divine, tend to be psychologically stronger than individuals who lack it. And the other thing that they're finding is that the greater they serve others, self-care through other care. Does this sound familiar? What did the Prophet ﷺ say? وَاللَّهُ فِي عَوْنِ الْعَبْدِ مَا كَانَ الْعَبْدُ فِي عَوْنِ أَخِيهِ. That Allah will take care of your needs in so much as you take care of others' needs. Other care. This idea of self-care is starting to be questioned. That everything is about self and self-care. But now they're starting to look at it and say, maybe we have this inverted. In fact, the responsibility may be flipped, and that we should do it the other way around. And that is that people who are very resilient, people who have psychological well-being, think about it, people who have better relationships, friendships, marriages, tend to be individuals who are concerned about other people. Last thing I'll say as a further example and a takeaway for us rather, is that one of my students, for example, is doing a dissertation now, a PhD dissertation, questioning the idea of whether marital satisfaction can really be achieved or repaired through teaching of communication skills and problem-solving skills, which is what all of the marital schools focus on. in psychology. All the schools of therapy, they focus on problem-solving communication skills. And what we're finding is that this leads to temporary relief, but it doesn't necessarily solve and make marriages happier in the long term. And what we're proposing is that there's actually another variable that we're missing. Rather than problem-solving techniques and communication techniques, which is necessary and important, but it's insufficient. It's necessary but not sufficient. The variable that we're missing is character and virtue. If we can embed virtues in each person such that they develop the capacity to be selfless, compassionate, empathic, have husn al-dhan, sabr, hilm, these golden virtues that we're now studying in this PhD dissertation, our hypothesis and our belief is that you would have essentially captured the essence of marital satisfaction, because it is two people, when they come together, not only from a dunyawi perspective, but from the ukhrawi perspective, as the Quran says, وَلَا تَسْتَوِ الْحَسَنَةُ وَلَا السَّيِّئَةُ ادْفَعْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ فَإِذَا الَّذِي بَيْنَكَ وَبَيْنَهُ عَدَاوَةٌ كَأَنَّهُ وَلِيٌّ حَمِيمٌ. Good and evil are not the same. Repel evil with good, not with self-care. Repel evil with good. أَحْسِنْ إِلَى مَنْ أَسَاءَ إِلَيْكَ. Do good to the one that doesn't do good to you. And if there was enmity between the two of you, Allah Ta'ala will make you like best friends. So we know that the formulas are being found in the character virtue literature, and it is upon us to start to think about the development of ourselves alongside of our activism and our education, to think about doing muhasaba of our own characteristics. Hasibu qabla an tuhasabu. And so may Allah Ta'ala give us tawfiq, the tawfiq al-kamil, to be able to embed and to actualize the virtues of the Prophet ﷺ, such that we can lead healthier lives, psychologically well lives, as well as resilient lives that will have lasting effects in this dunya and in the akhirah. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.